You drive through Vancouver's gleaming towers and pristine neighborhoods, everything looking prosperous and secure. But beneath British Columbia's postcard-perfect surface, economic foundations are cracking in ways that will devastate these 10 cities when the inevitable crash arrives. Prince George. Prince George sits at the crossroads of northern British Columbia, surrounded by vast forests and rich mineral deposits that built the city's identity over generations. Drive through the residential neighborhoods and you'll see the remnants of prosperity. Well-built homes from the boom years, established community centers, and infrastructure that speaks of better times. But look closer and you'll notice the for sale signs multiplying, the empty lots where businesses used to thrive, and conversations that always seem to turn to who's leaving next. 67% of Prince George's workforce depends directly on resource extraction, making it one of Canada's most vulnerable cities when those industries face systematic decline. That's not just loggers and miners, but the equipment operators, truck drivers, administrative staff, and thousands of support workers who exist because natural resources get pulled from the ground and cut from the forests. When commodity prices drop or operations shut down, the entire economic ecosystem collapses within weeks. The pulp mill closures tell the brutal story of an industry in permanent retreat. Since 2019, 1,800 jobs have vanished as mills either automated operations or closed entirely, with company executives openly discussing additional shutdowns as international competition and environmental regulations make older facilities economically unviable. These weren't temporary layoffs during market downturns. They were permanent eliminations that removed entire career paths from the local economy. Population statistics reveal the human cost of industrial decline. Prince George lost 7% of its residents in the last census period, with young families leading the exodus as they search for opportunities that simply don't exist in a resource-dependent economy facing permanent contraction. Downtown vacancy rates hit 23% as consumer spending disappeared along with steady paychecks. While Prince George battles resource depletion, another northern city faces even more isolated dependency challenges. Fort St. John. Fort St. John sprawls across the Peace River Valley like a frontier outpost that struck it rich, with massive pickup trucks, gleaming industrial facilities, and the kind of high-paying jobs that draw workers from across Canada. For decades, this northeastern BC city rode the oil and gas boom to prosperity that seemed unstoppable, creating millionaire roughnecks and supporting entire neighborhoods built on energy sector paychecks. But drive through town today and you'll sense the underlying anxiety as residents wonder whether the party is finally ending. 78% of Fort St. John's economy depends directly on fossil fuel extraction, making it Canada's most energy-dependent city, just as climate policies threaten the industry's long-term survival. That's not just drilling crews and pipeline workers, but the hotel operators, equipment suppliers, restaurants, and service businesses that exist because oil and gas companies pump billions into the regional economy. When energy prices crash or environmental regulations tighten, Fort St. John feels it immediately and devastatingly. The Site C Dam construction project ending will eliminate 2,400 temporary jobs by 2025, removing another pillar of economic stability from a community already vulnerable to energy market volatility. These weren't permanent positions, but they provided crucial economic diversity during uncertain times for the oil and gas sector. Without dam construction paychecks circulating through local businesses, the economic foundation becomes even more precarious. Geographic isolation makes economic diversification nearly impossible when energy companies reduce operations. Fort St. John sits 400 kilometers from the nearest major city, too far from transportation corridors, suppliers, and customer bases to attract alternative industries. Housing prices swing wildly between boom and bust cycles, creating wealth that disappears overnight when commodity markets shift. Energy dependency creates boom-bust cycles, but manufacturing towns face different systematic pressures. Kamloops. Kamloops sits at the confluence of two rivers in British Columbia's interior, perfectly positioned where major highways and rail lines converge to move goods across the province. For generations, this strategic location made the city an indispensable transportation hub, with massive rail yards, trucking terminals, and distribution centers that employed thousands of workers in stable, well-paying jobs. Walk through the industrial districts today, and you'll still see the infrastructure that built this prosperity, but you'll also notice the empty rail cars, the downsized facilities, and the growing sense that geography alone isn't enough anymore. Canadian National Railway's yard downsizing eliminated 450 jobs, with company executives announcing further cuts as automated systems reduce the need for human workers. These weren't just railway employees, but the mechanics, dispatchers, administrative staff, and contractors who built careers around moving freight through central British Columbia. When rail traffic declines, entire neighborhoods feel the economic impact within months. Highway traffic through Kamloops dropped 18% as shipping patterns increasingly favor coastal routes that bypass interior distribution centers entirely. Container ships dock directly at Vancouver and Prince Rupert, where automated systems load trucks that drive straight to their destinations without stopping at traditional logistics hubs. The Coquihalla Highway still carries traffic, but not the volume that sustained Kamloops trucking companies and fuel stops for decades. Tourism revenue collapsed alongside transportation employment. Hotel occupancy rates fell 31% post-pandemic and haven't recovered as business travelers and vacation visitors find fewer reasons to stop in a city losing its economic purpose. Government services are consolidating to Vancouver and Victoria, eliminating another layer of stable employment from a community already struggling with transportation sector decline. Transportation vulnerabilities extend beyond rail to affect entire port-dependent regional economies. Prince Rupert. Prince Rupert stretches along the Pacific coast like a fortress built for commerce, with deep-water harbors and container terminals that promise to make this northern port Canada's gateway to Asia. The city's location offers the shortest shipping route between North America and Asian markets, a geographic advantage that attracted billions in infrastructure investment and created thousands of maritime jobs. But walk through the port districts today, and you'll see idle cranes, empty container yards, and the unmistakable signs of an industry that's consolidating elsewhere, despite natural advantages. Container traffic through Prince Rupert declined 22% as Vancouver port expansions and improved rail connections captured the Asian trade that was supposed to fuel northern BC's economic renaissance. Shipping companies increasingly favor Vancouver's larger facilities and established logistics networks over Prince Rupert's geographic advantages, leaving the northern port fighting for scraps of international commerce. Automated cargo systems are eliminating 300 longshoreman positions by 2026 as port operators invest in robotic cranes and computerized loading systems that require minimal human oversight. These weren't just dock workers, but equipment operators, supervisors, and maintenance crews who built careers around moving containers between ships and rail cars. When automation replaces human workers, entire families lose their economic foundation overnight. Population exodus accelerated as maritime employment disappeared. Prince Rupert lost 9% of its residents since 2018, with working-age families leading the departure as job opportunities vanished. Infrastructure decay compounds the employment crisis. 40% of docks require major repairs that the shrinking city budget simply can't fund, creating a cycle where deteriorating facilities lose more shipping contracts. While northern ports struggle with automation, interior cities face agricultural processing challenges. Penticton. Penticton spreads across the Okanagan Valley like a postcard come to life, with rolling vineyards, pristine lakes, and mountain vistas that have attracted tourists and wine enthusiasts for decades. The city built its modern identity around agriculture and tourism, marketing itself as Canada's premier wine destination while processing fruits and vegetables from some of the country's most fertile farmland. Drive through the valley today and you'll still see those picturesque vineyards and orchards. But look closer and you'll notice the brown patches, the struggling vines, and the increasingly desperate conversations about water that simply isn't there anymore. Drought conditions reduced grape yields 28% over 3 growing seasons, forcing wineries to purchase fruit from other regions or reduce production entirely. Climate change isn't a future threat here. It's reshaping the agricultural foundation that everything else depends on. Extreme heat events and unpredictable precipitation patterns are making traditional farming practices economically unviable for crops that require consistent water and temperature conditions. Processing plant closures eliminated 680 food production jobs since 2020 as companies relocated operations to regions with more reliable water supplies and climate conditions. These weren't just seasonal workers, but year-round employees in packaging, quality control, logistics, and management positions that provided stable middle-class incomes for families throughout the valley. Tourism revenue dropped 35% as extreme weather events damaged the region's appeal to visitors seeking outdoor recreation and scenic beauty. Smoke from wildfires, water shortages affecting recreational activities, and unpredictable weather patterns are keeping tourists away during peak seasons, when local businesses depend on visitor spending. Municipal water restrictions threaten both agricultural operations and residential growth, creating an impossible choice between economic development and resource conservation. Agricultural vulnerability connects to broader rural economic challenges affecting resource communities. Cranbrook. Cranbrook sits nestled in the Rocky Mountain Trench, serving as the unofficial capital of southeastern British Columbia's Kootenay region. For decades, this strategic location made the city an essential service hub, providing healthcare, education, retail, and government services to dozens of smaller communities scattered across the mountains and valleys. Walk through downtown Cranbrook and you'll see the regional hospital, government offices, and shopping centers that drew people from the hundreds of kilometers away. But you'll also notice the empty storefronts, the reduced hours, and the growing realization that serving a shrinking population isn't sustainable anymore. Tech Resources announced 400 job cuts at its coal operations, eliminating another pillar of economic stability from a region already struggling with resource sector decline. These weren't just mining positions, but the contractors, equipment suppliers, and support services that exist because coal gets extracted from southeastern BC mountains. When major employers scale back operations, regional service centers feel the impact immediately through reduced consumer spending and tax revenues. Hospital and school consolidations are reducing government employment as provincial authorities merge services to cut costs. Healthcare workers face longer commutes to consolidated facilities, while teachers lose positions as school districts combine operations. The rural population that Cranbrook serves shrank 12% in the last census period, reducing demand for regional services that once provided economic stability. Geographic isolation makes economic diversification nearly impossible when traditional industries contract. Cranbrook sits 350 kilometers from Calgary and 600 kilometers from Vancouver, too far from major markets to attract manufacturing or technology companies. The retail and service sectors contract along with the regional population they serve, creating a downward spiral where fewer customers mean fewer jobs and fewer jobs mean fewer customers. Rural service centers struggle differently than cities dependent on single major employers. Campbell River. Campbell River clings to Vancouver Island's eastern shore, where towering forests meet the Pacific Ocean, built on the dual foundation of logging and fishing that sustained generations of island families. For decades, this combination seemed unshakable. Massive timber operations provided year-round employment, while world-class salmon fishing drew tourists from across North America during peak seasons. Walk through Campbell River today, and you'll still see the remnants of both industries, but you'll also notice the silent sawmills, the empty fishing lodges, and the growing realization that environmental protection and economic survival have become impossible to reconcile. Forestry employment dropped 45% since old-growth logging restrictions eliminated access to the large valuable trees that made island logging profitable. These weren't just sawmill workers, but the truckers, equipment operators, and contractors who built careers around harvesting timber from some of Canada's most productive forests. When environmental policies protect remaining old-growth stands, entire logging operations become economically unviable overnight. Salmon runs declined 60%, destroying the sport fishing tourism base that was supposed to replace forestry jobs. Fishing lodges that operated for decades now struggle to attract guests when legendary salmon runs have dwindled to fractions of historical levels. Climate change, ocean conditions, and habitat destruction created a perfect storm that eliminated the natural resource tourism depended on. Ferry service costs rising make island businesses increasingly uncompetitive with mainland alternatives. The aquaculture industry faces regulatory shutdown that would eliminate 800 jobs as environmental concerns about fish farming operations intensify. What happens when a community loses both its traditional industry and its replacement economy simultaneously? Island communities face unique transportation and regulatory challenges, but mainland cities battle different demographic crises. Chilliwack. Chilliwack stretches across the Fraser Valley's fertile floodplains, surrounded by some of British Columbia's richest agricultural land that has fed the province for over a century. The city built its modern economy around food processing, turning locally grown crops into packaged goods that filled grocery shelves across Western Canada. Drive through the industrial areas today, and you'll still see the massive processing facilities and distribution centers, but you'll also notice the automated equipment replacing human workers, the competition from imported products, and the growing realization that proximity to farmland doesn't guarantee manufacturing jobs anymore. Food processing plants automated operations, eliminating 1,200 manufacturing jobs as companies invested in robotic systems that package, sort, and process agricultural products with minimal human oversight. These weren't just assembly line workers, but quality control technicians, machine operators, and supervisors who built careers around turning Fraser Valley crops into consumer products. When automation replaces human workers, entire neighborhoods lose their economic foundation within months. The USMCA trade agreement favors Mexican agricultural imports that undercut Canadian processors with lower labor costs and year-round growing seasons. Products that once required local processing now arrive pre-packaged from facilities where workers earn a fraction of Canadian wages. Urban sprawl from Vancouver creates additional pressure as housing costs price out agricultural workers while converting farmland to residential developments. Climate change threatens the agricultural foundation everything depends on. Atmospheric rivers and extreme weather events flood Fraser Valley farmland with increasing frequency, destroying crops and making agricultural operations economically unpredictable. The 2021 floods demonstrated how quickly natural disasters can eliminate entire growing seasons, leaving processing facilities without raw materials and workers without paychecks. Agricultural processing challenges extend beyond rural areas to affect suburban communities serving resource sectors. Nanaimo occupies a commanding position on Vancouver Island's east coast, strategically located between Victoria and Northern Island communities as the region's traditional commercial and administrative center. For decades, this mid-island location made Nanaimo essential for government services, retail commerce, and higher education that served hundreds of thousands of island residents. Walk through the downtown core today, and you'll see the government buildings, shopping centers, and university campus that once guaranteed economic stability. But you'll also notice the consolidation notices, the empty office spaces, and the ferry schedules that increasingly favor Victoria over everywhere else. Provincial government services relocated to Victoria eliminated 350 civil service positions as budget pressures forced administrative consolidation in the capital city. These weren't just clerks and administrators, but program managers, policy analysts, and specialized professionals who provided middle-class stability for families throughout central Vancouver Island. When government operations centralize, regional centers lose both employment and the economic activity that flows from steady public sector paychecks. The retail sector declined 19% as residents increasingly shop online or make day trips to Victoria's larger commercial districts. Shopping malls that anchored Nanaimo's economy for generations now feature too many vacant storefronts and too few customers to sustain traditional retail operations. Vancouver Island University enrollment dropped as students choose mainland institutions, reducing education sector employment while eliminating another source of economic stability. Ferry dependency creates additional vulnerability as BC Ferries considers service cuts and fare increases that make island living increasingly expensive. When transportation costs rise, businesses struggle to compete with mainland alternatives while residents face difficult choices about whether island life remains affordable. Government dependency creates vulnerabilities similar to private sector reliance, as our final city demonstrates. Terrace sits at the confluence of the Skeena and Kitsumkallam rivers in northwestern British Columbia, serving as the economic lifeline for an isolated region larger than many European countries. For generations, this strategic position made Terrace indispensable as the service center where loggers, miners, and fishermen came for supplies, healthcare, and government services that couldn't be found anywhere else for hundreds of kilometers. Drive through the residential neighborhoods today, and you'll see the infrastructure built to support a thriving resource economy, but you'll also notice the empty houses, the reduced services, and the growing realization that when multiple industries collapse simultaneously, entire regions can become economically uninhabitable. The aluminum smelter closure eliminated 1,000 direct jobs and 2,000 indirect positions when Rio Tinto shuttered operations rather than invest in required environmental upgrades. This wasn't just another plant closure. It was the removal of northwestern BC's largest private employer and the economic anchor that supported dozens of supplier companies, contractors, and service businesses throughout the region. Forestry sector unemployment reached 23%, the highest rate in British Columbia, as old-growth logging restrictions and market conditions eliminated sawmill operations that operated for decades. Indigenous land claims create additional uncertainty for resource development as unresolved territorial disputes prevent new projects while existing operations face regulatory challenges. Healthcare worker shortages force service reductions in a region serving 50,000 people across a vast territory where the nearest alternative medical facilities sit hours away by treacherous mountain highways. When doctors and nurses leave isolated communities, residents face impossible choices between adequate healthcare and economic survival in places where both natural resources and essential services are disappearing simultaneously. These 10 cities represent British Columbia's economic future, and it's arriving faster than anyone expected.